and welcome to the Navigating Childhood Cancer podcast. In this podcast, we explore all aspects of a child's cancer diagnosis. We'll speak with the parents, experts, caregivers, and maybe even the children themselves to understand the issues, the risks, the struggles, and the triumphs. My name is Heather, and this is the information I wish I had when my child was diagnosed with leukemia. Thank you for being here, and welcome to episode 3. This episode comes with a trigger warning. We will be talking about a child's serious illness and the possibility of death. I'm calling this episode The Darkness and the Light because I'd like to talk about both. As you would expect, there is a lot of darkness that follows a child's cancer diagnosis. It was literally the worst thing to have ever happened to me, ever, in my lifetime. And if you've been through this experience, you may be able to relate. If you're about to go through it, I'd really like to acknowledge the feelings of darkness that you may encounter. Not to bring anyone down. Instead, I want to call attention to the reality of this experience in order to try to help others to see that they are not alone in their sadness or their fear. Maybe I'm also hoping to hear that I'm not alone in my own thoughts as well. Surprisingly, there were also moments of light. Actually, so many moments of light. So much beauty, so much to be grateful for. I certainly would never have wished this on my child, or anyone's child for that matter. But I have realized that with this experience, there are things that we would not have learned, things that we could not have had the opportunity to know, or people we would not have met had it not been for this experience. So the light deserves some attention too, because the moments of light were truly what helped us through and are helping us to recover. It was helpful to me to remember that even in despair, life can be beautiful. There's so many quotes about darkness versus light. I was able to find one that was attributed to Mark Frost, which says, "Without light, there is no darkness." I actually prefer it the other way around. Without darkness, there can be no light. In another quote, D.H. Sidebottom wrote, "The stars cannot shine without the darkness." I think you get the picture. We all want to see the light, but to see it properly, the darkness needs to be acknowledged. So as I was saying, of course, the diagnosis of cancer for a child comes with many negative emotions and very difficult experiences. Sadness, grief, fear, nausea, pain. It's hard to know even where to begin, and truly the list is as plentiful as there are patients. Everyone has a different experience, and with every child who is sick, there is a parent or two, a sibling or two, grandparents, aunties and uncles, cousins, friends, teachers, each of them experiencing their own range of emotions and their own brand of darkness. When we received my child's diagnosis, I certainly had my own roller coaster of emotions and a lot of very dark moments. I felt the weight of needing to share the news with my partner and my other children, and I will tell you that that was hard, and the responsibility of supporting them as we together processed the news and attempted to navigate our paths forward. That day, my sister had driven in from out of town to be with my family while we waited for the outcome of the test that my child had been undergoing. Because I was in hospital, she was there to support my family at home and to help my partner to explain the news to the kids and to be with them while we all figured out what to do next. In my darkest moment, I was reminded of the light that exists in the world. And that is the topic that I would like to talk about today. I acknowledge that we are also in a very fortunate position to have a child who is now in recovery from this whole situation. So when I speak with you today, it is from that very privileged position of talking about our experience in the past. It is almost over for us. For some, the experience is not over, nor will it ever be. I cannot begin to speculate what the experience must be like for the family who has lost a child to this awful, insidious disease. I often wonder what it must be like. And I also wonder if, in that situation, it is even possible to see the light after experiencing that level of darkness. Again, a darkness that I cannot begin to understand. In the process of creating this podcast, I hope to have the opportunity to speak with parents who might be able to answer those questions for us, or who may wish to share their stories. But I will not speculate. I will only speak from my own experience today. And speaking of the light, I'm also going to try to avoid the toxic positivity that can sometimes surround the cancer narrative. I'm careful about using the word toxic because I understand it and I'm not judging it. I completely understand why some people turn to absolute relentless commitment to positivity. In the face of something so awful, a good news story to counter the evil, to ward off the demons, is understandable. It simply did not resonate with me during our time in the trenches. The struggle was too real, and for me, it could not be fixed or resolved or made easier in any way by talk of strength and bravery and reaching the summit or winning the race. For me, the positive moments were a little more quiet, a little more subtle. They caught me off guard and appeared in the most unlikely places. But they were no less meaningful and no less impactful in helping us through. Some of these things I could only have learned from having been through something so awful and hard. So let's get started. I'm going to start off with the hard stuff. And I'm going to start the hard stuff with acknowledgement of what was the hardest and the darkest part of this whole experience for me, which was watching my child suffer. Before the diagnosis, there were unexplained symptoms that were causing us concern for months. So when we finally did receive a diagnosis, it was a moment of relief to finally know what was going on, what was causing the symptoms, and to know that there was a treatment plan available. But that moment of relief was fleeting. Cancer is a large price to pay for answers about what's causing a child's symptoms. We spend our lives trying to build a good life for our kids. We want them to be happy. Our purpose as parents is literally to help them avoid suffering. And when they do get hurt, our job is to kiss it better. So to see a child who we love so much suffer in such a remarkable way was 100% the darkest experience of my life. It was made worse by the fact that there was nothing I could do to ease the suffering. I couldn't make it easier. I couldn't take it away. I could only stand by while my child had to do all of the hard things. It felt unnatural and unfair and just really freaking dark. Next in the long line of hard things was taking my child to the hospital to present them to a team who was prepared to fill their body with such a toxic substance, that being chemotherapy. A toxicity that is required to kill an even more toxic thing, that being cancer. Even though I knew it was required to help my child get better, it was very, very hard to do. It was sometimes hard just putting one foot in front of the other to get to the hospital on those mornings, knowing what lay ahead for my child. During the process, if I allowed myself to think about it too much, it was also easy to become overwhelmed with worry and fear about the outcome. Our oncology fellow was not keen to get into statistics or percentages and advised us not to think of it in that way. She had more of a we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, if we get to it kind of approach. I recall that our first treatment protocol had an 85% chance of succeeding, which is obviously a very good number. But to me, that still meant a 15% chance that it might not work. And that number felt just too high. And although I was encouraged to focus on the high likelihood of recovery, I couldn't help but worry about the what if. The stakes were just too high. And I'm sorry to admit that my mind went to some pretty dark places. If I'm being completely honest, I still sometimes allow those thoughts to creep back in. I worry about my children on a good day. Add cancer to the mix, and the worry becomes next level. I think that's understandable, and I'm certain that this is something that I share with many, many parents out there. Every floor of the hospital has a different purpose. The 4th floor is cardiac care. The 6th floor is neurology. The 8th floor is where the hematology and oncology clinics reside. As I've said before, Sick Kids is a wonderful place, but none of us really wants to have to be there. There were days when we'd be waiting to get on the elevator, and there would be a family with a toddler or even an infant waiting in front of us. The elevator doors would open, and we'd all file in, and the toddler would reach up, as small children love to do. They love pushing the elevator buttons. And the toddler would select the button for the 8th floor. Sometimes the parent would have to lift the toddler so that they could push the button. My heart would sink at the realization that they too were headed to the 8th floor. No matter how good things were going for us in those moments, the wave of darkness that washed over me at the sight of those small children making their way to the 8th floor was crushing. Speaking of seeing your children, seeing my child wheeled on a stretcher out of a treatment room and into the recovery room never got easy. Of course, there's gratitude that there's treatment for this disease and that we have access to this treatment, and that the people who are administering it are so caring and thorough and gentle and smart. But gosh, seeing your child who's been put under so that a team could inject a needle into their spine to administer chemotherapy, it takes your breath away. That sight, it actually hurts. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that my pain even came close to what the children in this scenario are experiencing. I'm just telling you that it was the worst for me as an adult. I'd never wanted my child to have to be brave, that stoic, or to climb up on that stretcher and agree to this treatment despite knowing what it would feel like afterwards. When all you really want for a child at this time is to be outdoors, enjoying the summer, playing in the grass and the sprinkler, riding their bikes with their friends, it hurts. It actually hurts to see them lying unconscious on a gurney following a chemotherapy treatment. There's also darkness in the waiting. So after tests have been done, cells have been extracted, and blood has been drawn, time passes before you're able to know the result. This is true in any healthcare environment. We knew, on our first day in the hospital, after a series of tests had been performed, that leukemia was one of the possibilities, or one of the things that they were investigating. But it took 36 hours and lots of tests, including a biopsy, to know for sure. Actually, it was called a bone marrow aspirate. That 36 hours of waiting were filled with a lot of deep breaths. For me, it was an entirely sleepless night, and I got lots of caring looks from hospital staff as though they knew something I didn't yet know. So of course my mind went to many dark places. A Google search brought me a statistic that sounded promising, but that statistic, again, still had the possibility of a negative outcome. The waiting, as they say, is the hardest part. After the waiting comes the next moment of darkness, which is when the news is delivered. In our case, it was done with compassion and a lot of information that I needed to have repeated to me later because my mind could not process it all during that first conversation. When I listened to what the doctors were telling us, I was watching my child, who was old enough to understand what was being said. And I wanted to scoop them up and run from the news that was being delivered. I was also wishing that there was some way that I could take on the cancer, just let it be me. And the fact that that wasn't possible brought deep, deep disappointment. Speaking of disappointment, that's a great word to describe the regret over everything that you don't get to do because you are now focused on battling cancer. There was disappointment about the summer that we were no longer going to be able to have. There was disappointment about the years of my child's childhood that would be different and not childlike at all. My child, while old enough to understand, was still a child who had plans for a summer filled with super fun activities, and those plans were dashed. That disappointment for my child was almost greater than the news about cancer itself. That's the way the mind of a child works. My child's disappointment was also my disappointment, and boy, that was also hard. For me, the darkness can be described as a weight. It rested heavily on my heart and my conscience. It was that sick feeling that comes when you wake up in the morning and after a brief moment of calm, you remember that you're in the middle of something terrible. I'm sharing these things now, as I've said, for the benefit of this podcast and the people who might need to hear it. But I recall that there was a time when it was too hard or too heavy for me to admit these things. I hope that it's not too hard to hear them now. My hope is that sharing will create a feeling that you aren't alone in your experience. And I don't really know why, but it feels important to me to admit that the darkness just needed to be shared. Now let's move on to the light. The light are the things that inspired a moment of joy or levity, a small pleasure, a smile or a laugh, and a feeling of lightness in an otherwise dark journey. I know that everyone will have their own list of things that brought them the light, and I'd like to share mine with you now. The first is really simple, and it is the ice machines at Sick Kids. So this is one of those if you know things that brought me immense joy during our time at the hospital. Every waiting area and kitchenette that accompanies a ward contains a nice machine that also dispenses water. And I've heard some complaints about the water at Sick Kids, but for me, the water was cold and fresh, and the ice that accompanied it was in small pieces that, I don't know, it was easy to crunch. I almost always get myself a cup of water with ice when I'm in the hospital, and it's just a small thing that brought me a lot of joy during that time. The other source of light for me is the free Wi-Fi at the hospital. So again, if you've been to Sick Kids Hospital, you've probably spent some time complaining about the Wi-Fi. But when you're there for hours or days and you need to spend some time on your phone or your laptop, such as times that I needed to catch up on some work or take a Zoom call from the hospital or even watch a movie with my kid on the computer, I was grateful to have had that Wi-Fi. It wasn't perfect, but it helped. And every time I was prompted to accept the Wi-Fi, I had a moment of gratitude. Like I thought, thanks guys. You didn't have to do that, but I really appreciate it. Another source of light for me are the nurses. Where can I possibly start talking about the nurses? These people are professionals, obviously, who are ridiculously good at their job of caring for sick children. But they also have other skills that make them more than just healthcare providers. They are remarkable. I've talked of kindness, but there's also interest in your child. There's that odd moment of humor. There's thoughtfulness that's unexpected. There's a feeling that these people care deeply for their patients and for the families of their patients. It feels like their jobs are more than just a job. The nurses at Sick Kids are beacons of light walking around the hospital. And I know this sounds a little corny, but they were lighting the way for me. They were lighting our way. Another group of remarkable people is the team from Campfire Circle. So if you aren't familiar with Campfire Circle, they are an organization that facilitates a summer camp experience for children who are undergoing cancer treatment. They literally take them up north in order to give them as much of a normal summer experience as possible, despite the reality of their illnesses. They have a camp that is nestled on the side of a lake, and they run summer camps for patients as well as their families. and even have bereavement camps for siblings where necessary. Doctors and nurses spend time at that camp in order to ensure that treatment is being administered according to plan for each of the children that participates in the camp. Campfire Circle also has staff in the hospital year-round who visit with children and their parents to play games, sing songs, and generally try to keep up the spirits of everyone. So just imagine if your job was to try to cheer up children who are undergoing cancer treatment. I mean, imagine putting on a clown nose or walking the halls with a ukulele to play for children who are raging with hunger before a lumbar puncture, or to soothe the spirits of a child who is lonely and in isolation. Imagine the moment of respite and joy that they are able to bring to a parent who is sick with worry or exhaustion, to have a friendly face come into the hospital room to sing a song or to chat with your child in their hospital bed so that you can have a quiet moment and maybe even just turn off for a second. Again, these people are literally beacons of light. I also found a lot of joy seeing the experiences of families who are willing to become ambassadors for the hospital. Those who share their stories or their struggles on social media, the children appear in posters throughout the hospital, online, they come in the emails that you receive from the hospital, and they give this journey a face and a story. And these families give us all a moment of encouragement. If he can do this, or she can do this, well, we can too. My kid can too. Those families, those ambassadors whose faces line the walls of the hospital, well, you are light. And I'm not even kidding. I just love you all. So the next one is a bit of a strange one, but I found a lot of satisfaction witnessing the ritual that is created around the treatment. It's something that builds confidence and reassurance to a concerned parent. Obviously, medicine is a serious business, and administering chemotherapy is something that requires precision and protection for all involved. There was a strange joy that I experienced watching the nurses go through the process of preparing to administer chemotherapy, or, for example, accessing the port. The port is a small device that is surgically implanted under the skin at the beginning of treatment so that blood can be drawn and treatment can be administered without having to insert needles into the veins in the arms. There's a very specialized method to accessing the port that requires multiple steps and sterile equipment. The process is methodical, it's consistent, it's sterile, and it's satisfying. Every single time I watched the nurses access my child's port, I stood and watched. I even took notes so that I could remember the steps because I was so curious and didn't ever want to forget those steps. I now know those steps by heart, and I actually love watching it being done. I know this must sound strange, but it's true. Something unbelievably satisfying about watching the professionals prepare for a very serious and very important procedure. So, throughout Sick Kids Hospital, there are also small moments of humor that you don't expect. And I believe that these are things that were created by people who understand what other people are going through, and also people who remember that the hospital is a place where children are spending a lot of time. These are things that are designed to inject a bit of fun or humor for those children in care. An example is the ticket to ride. So if a child needs to be transferred from one department to another, and if that transfer requires the child to be on a gurney, then that transfer is supervised by an individual, and the paperwork that is used to transfer from one department to another is called the ticket to ride. I don't know why, but that just really brought a smile to my face. In addition to the kindness and the light conversation that I had with the person who was transferring my child from one department to another. There was also a day when we had tests in various different parts of the hospital, and as you can imagine, trying to get from one department to another can be confusing. So they often will assign a volunteer to help you navigate the depths of the hospital and get from one appointment to the next. In one case, the volunteer who showed up at our door to take us to our next appointment was an elderly woman, and she was so delightful. And she had a wheelchair with her. I expect she was accustomed to pushing toddlers through the hallways and taking them from one place to another. But my child is not a toddler, and my child was actually taller than the woman who arrived to escort us to our next appointment. And we had a lot of fun chatting with her about the fact that she wasn't going to be able to push that wheelchair if my child did decide to sit down. There are also some colorful footsteps that take you from one end of the hospital to another. And you can imagine children, when they have the energy, following those footsteps from one to the other. And you know when you're walking those steps, even without a child in tow, that those footsteps are designed for the kids. I also loved the nurses whose stethoscopes had little plastic frogs or Pikachu, or who wore scrubs that featured Baby Yoda or Minnie Mouse. Again, these are people who understand their audience, and I imagine those stethoscopes or scrubs get a lot of comments from kids who are excited to see that's what their nurse is wearing today. Throughout the hospital, there are also cartoon paintings in the hallways that depict whatever the area is that you're in. As an example, in the X-ray area, there are paintings on the wall of animals that are getting X-rays. For example, there's a giraffe having his neck X-rayed. I believe another one is maybe an elephant's tail. And it's just adorable and a little bit preposterous to think about an X-ray being done on an animal. But again, you're sitting there waiting for your appointment, and that gives you a little chuckle, maybe a smile, and probably an interesting conversation with your child. Now, one of the other things that is a source of light at this hospital is the kind way that the different caregivers speak to the children. The children are the patients in this hospital, and they are treated with kindness, with respect, with optimism, with realness, and they're not spoken to in any kind of a patronizing way. They're spoken to like human beings who deserve attention and who deserve the care that they're receiving. It's like they understand that children of all ages are full and capable human beings whose opinions matter and who deserve to be a part of the discussion about their health and their futures. I imagine it's a little bit different depending upon the age of the child, but that was my experience. We learned so much from those people at Sick Kids, and I try to incorporate that approach to children, the lessons that I learned through this experience, into my own role as a parent, but also as a caring adult to the other kids in my life. When you spend time in a hospital room at Sick Kids, you almost always see stickers. Stickers on the windows, stickers on the fridge, stickers on the wall, and you know that those stickers were placed there by some child or children who stayed in that room before you. I enjoyed looking at those stickers. Part of me was hoping that the person who put those stickers there, the child who once put those stickers there, is now out in the world somewhere living a full life. And the stickers are also a reminder that your stay in the hospital is only temporary. Even if it's a long one, it's still going to be over at some point, and eventually somebody else will be taking your place in that hospital bed. Another sweet thing about my time spent at Sick Kids was the way that everyone there called me Mom. Everyone in the hospital knows my child's name as they're looking at their profile or the chart with each and every interaction. but they can't be expected to know the names of all the parents and caregivers who accompany the patients to their treatments. So they call us Mom. I never minded this at all. In fact, I kind of loved it. Even the cashier at the pharmacy accidentally called me Mom one day. It was unexpected. Again, the nurses call me Mom, but it wasn't something I expected to experience downstairs in the store. She said, "That'll be $12, Mom." And I looked up from my wallet and I laughed and I said, "I'm sorry, but did you just call me Mom?" She also laughed and was a little bit embarrassed and apologized. And I said, No, it's okay. Everyone here calls me Mom. You can call me Mom too. So kindness is obviously consistent through all of these stories. And the kindness of others shows up in many unexpected ways. I talked about this at great length in episode 2, but I feel it requires mentioning again that the kindness of others can bring moments of light into the lives of people who are enduring so much darkness. For the full story on ways to show kindness and how to support a family in this journey, please feel free to listen to episode 2. In the 2 years that we've been going to Sick Kids Hospital, there has been a building under construction across the street. So if you are staying overnight or spending time in the hospital for many days, and you need an opportunity to leave your room, you can go out into the hallway, and there are benches and chairs where you can overlook Elizabeth Street, where across the street a building is under construction. We spent lots of time sitting at that window, and there are lots of kids sitting there looking out those windows. From time to time, the construction workers in the building across the street would look up and wave at the kids in the windows. I imagine they probably are aware of the fact that they're being watched day and night by the kids in the windows at the hospital. There are also children who probably had their day made because those construction workers decided to wave. Gosh, as a mother, I was happy to see the construction workers waving at us. I've also talked previously about the people at Starbucks who offer a kind smile with their service, knowing that you're the parent of a sick child. I once had such a sweet interaction with somebody who was working at Starbucks that I asked her, "Did you receive training for how to treat parents here when you're working at Starbucks at the hospital?" Because it seemed like she had been taught or had been told how to treat people. She treated me with such tenderness and kindness. She said no, there was no training. We just know that everybody here has a child who is sick, and we're trying to just be a moment of kindness in your day. Another source of light for me is the people who ask my parents still about how their grandchild is doing. So obviously my parents have talked about their grandchild to their friends and other people in their community. And there are people who still, when they see my parents, ask them about their grandchild. And not only does this mean a lot to me to know that people are thinking about my kid and wondering about his well-being, but it means a great deal to me as well to know that people are thinking about my parents and giving them a moment of kindness by asking them about how their grandchild is doing. I don't always know who it is. Sometimes my parents will tell me that they bumped into so-and-so today and they asked how my child is doing. But I may never have the opportunity to thank them, but it's important for them to know how grateful I am that they're checking in on my parents in that way. So I've saved the best for last. The number one thing about this entire experience has been the time spent with my child. Hands down, this has been the best part of this entire experience. Whether it was lying together in a hospital bed watching a movie, or laughing at something that a nurse said that was unintentionally inappropriate, or hoping that we'd get our favorite spot in the parking garage, or skipping school and skipping work in order to go for brunch after treatment instead of heading back home, or learning together how to take meds, or laying together on the sofa while we wait for the nausea to subside, or watching the hair start to grow in, or experimenting with different foods and beverages that might help to offset the nausea. All of this was a bit of an adventure for us. I wish my child never had to go through any of this. But since we don't have a choice, I am honored to be among those who got to be by their side throughout all of it. I'm amazed by the strength and the grace and the dignity that it took to get us here, and the unwavering commitment to healing. I would never want a child to have to think about these things, but I'm impressed and I'm grateful for the opportunity to have witnessed it. I have now seen what my child is capable of, and I couldn't be more proud and humbled. As if I didn't already love my kids enough, right? We all do. I know we all think highly of our kids, and of course, I adore all of my kids. But watching this particular child endure this particular experience has been the greatest source of darkness and the greatest source of light of my life. So there you have it. Thank you for joining us today. And if you'd like to learn more, you can find us online at navigatingchildhoodcancer.com and on social media at NCC Podcast. If you and your family are on this journey, I am so sorry. I hope you'll stay to listen and that you find something valuable here. If you'd like to share your perspective, please reach out. If you know someone whose child is living through a cancer diagnosis, I also invite you to stick around and to share this podcast with your community. Because truly, we can only get through this together.